Well,
you
I
asked me
want to
a
get
question?
back to the reason why you think that the medical establishment and or whomever is pushing this.
Okay, all right. The medical establishment has been hijacked.
Dr. Miriam Grossman is board certified in psychiatry and specializes in child and adolescent psychiatry. She's written 5 books, her latest entitled Lost in Trans Nation, about the transgender ideology taking physically healthy children and medically disfiguring them on the operating table and with drugs, permanently damaging their bodies and making them ultimately infertile. Dr. Grossman was featured in the Daily Wire's famous documentary with Matt Walsh called What is a Woman? She's appeared on Fox Nation's The Miseducation of America, and she's been featured in many other documentaries. Before gender ideology was on anyone's radar, she warned parents about its falsehoods and dangers. And today, her practice currently focuses on gender distressed young people and their parents. And I want to welcome you to the show, Dr. Miriam Grossman.
Thank you, Tamar. It's great to be here with you.
So, throughout the ages, I believe humans were never confused about what sex they were. All they needed to do was to look. And if there were any people who felt that they identified more as one sex than the other, then they either buried those feelings or they got help or they lived part of their lives in secrecy. Their gender identity problems didn't really infect society. It didn't get mainstreamed. So my question to you is, why all of a sudden in this new generation are we seeing so much of this?
Well, you are correct that we have always known about individuals, very rare, one in tens of thousands of people, who have a deep discomfort with their body, with their sexed bodies. And we knew in psychiatry that these, again, very rare individuals, and that they fell in basically 2 categories. One were little boys, little meaning before the age of about 7. They would insist that they are girls, or they would say, they were preoccupied with wanting to be, with yearning to be girls. And these were kids who, as we followed them over time, and we have 11 studies from different places in the world that followed these little, mostly boys, we know that with time and with puberty, they would outgrow it. So they would outgrow this discomfort with their bodies and their intense wish to be the opposite sex. And many of them would be gay men. Now, the other group that we knew about were middle-aged heterosexual men who would, as you mentioned, cross-dress for whatever reason. And then some of them in middle age would decide to go further than cross-dressing and actually have medical and surgical treatments so that they would appear more female. Now, your question about what happened all of a sudden that this is so huge is the question everyone's asking, of course. And I have come out with a book that answers not only that, but many other questions on this issue. And the name of the book is Lost in Trans Nation. I hope you can see that.
Yes.
Lost in Trans Nation, a child psychiatrist's guide out of the madness. Because it really, Tamar, I probably don't have to tell you that this really is madness. It is madness to be teaching little kids that there's such a thing as being born in the wrong body, and that perhaps they were born in the wrong body, and that the doctor or the midwife in the delivery room assigned them a sign. I don't know what word is used in Hebrew. The language, of course, is a huge element of this social movement. It is a social political movement. But here, in English speaking Western countries, the language that is used is sex assigned at birth. Now, sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception. So, this is just the starting point here. So let's just get that straight from the get go, that sex is not assigned at birth. It is permanently established when the sperm and the egg unite. Then you have either a developing male or female embryo and fetus. That is permanent, that is established, and that is what we always knew biologically to be true. Mammals, and we are mammals, mammals are sexually dimorphic, male or female. Now, there are individuals that we now call intersex individuals, and some of them are born with genitalia that are not clearly male or female. And in those extremely rare circumstances, 0.02% of births, yes, it is necessary sometimes to assign. So it's in those cases, it is, I guess you could properly use that word. But for all the rest of us, that is just not the case. Now, why is that language?
Well, I just want to ask you, when they want to assign, wouldn't they just find out if this little baby is XX or XY, and then it's not them assigning it, they're just making it more clear?
Well, in these kids, the thing is, some of them may not be X, Y, and XX. So, there are rare conditions in which chromosomes are neither, you have a neither XY or XX. But the point is that even in those individuals who are not clearly from a chromosomal or endocrinological perspective clearly male or female, their reproductive systems are still designed to produce either egg or sperm. And so even if they are infertile and they are a true, what we used to call a hermaphrodite, and they're not going to produce eggs or sperm, they still fall into the category of either egg producers, potential egg producers, or sperm producers. Now, I want you to understand here, you see, our conversation, Tamar, has turned to a corner of medicine that is extremely unusual. And what the social movement has done is it has taken those very, very rare conditions and generalized it as if they apply to everybody. And they're telling kids, and us telling everybody, but I'm most concerned, of course, about kids. Because kids believe what they're told when it's repeated over and over again by an authority figure. So kids are being told, A, that boy and girl is randomly assigned when they were born by a doctor or midwife who may very well have made a mistake. B, that male and female are just two options, and they lie at the extremes of a spectrum, and that along that spectrum there are endless possibilities of sex. So this is all false. And this is just the beginning of the perversion of language and biology that's currently going on. So while we're talking about sex, I'm going to mention the word gender, which is a relatively new word, and gender identity, a relatively new concept. Now, gender and gender identity are used to refer to the idea that in addition to a biological sex, a physical sex, the idea that we also have a psychological sex, okay, a sex that's purely in our minds, and it relates to how we feel, the experience that we have, how we want to be perceived by others. Now, I explain all this in my book. This idea was the brainchild of a man by the name of John Money. He brought this idea to the world that psychological sex could be completely separated from biological sex, and that psychological sex was the more important one of the two. So this really forms the foundation of what we now have, which is this this crusade, a how should I call it? A turbocharged crusade to convince kids that all these things are true. And what I'm arguing is that this is damaging, extremely dangerous, and that children and families and society is paying a huge and terrible price for these beliefs.
What do you think, though, is the agenda behind it? I get a lot of feed from many different places, and there is a school of thought that the global elites are trying to depopulate the world, and one of the ways to do it is to get people not to reproduce. And if you do this gender mixing up of people and you stop their fertility, or if you promote a homosexual agenda, also less homosexual couples have children they may adopt, but that this is all like an agenda. Would you agree with that? Would you disagree? Where are you on that?
Well, we can go into that. I just want to mention first that as a psychiatrist and as a child psychiatrist, I am focused really on the kids and the family and the effect that this has. And I'm focused on explaining to parents everything they need to know so that they can reject this ideology and not allow it to enter their homes. So that being said, certainly this social movement, this ideology is leading to the sterilization of young people. And I'll just explain, your audience may not realize that when a child is put on a puberty blocker at a young age, and that is what the so-called standards of care call for. They call for beginning puberty blockers right at the start of puberty. Now, at the start of puberty, the body has not yet gotten to the point of producing mature eggs and sperm. Now, those puberty blockers are going to stop normal development, not only sexual development and development of the reproductive system, but of course all development, brain development, development of all the various systems of the body. But let's focus on now the reproductive system. So if these kids are put on puberty blockers before an age where puberty has been allowed to really begin, there's been a surge of either an estrogen and testosterone, which permits their systems to develop and for eggs and sperm to develop. Those kids will not ever, well, wait, just 1 minute. There's one thing that I should have said. Those kids that are placed on blockers, even though it is, we are told over and over again that these blockers are 100% reversible, not true, by the way, but perhaps more importantly, over 90%, and in some studies closer to 100% of kids placed on puberty blockers continue right down the assembly line onto the cross-sex hormones and then possibly onto the surgeries. So theoretically, yes, if you take a 10 or 11-year-old boy, let's say, and you socially transition that boy, meaning you accept his identity as a girl, you use a girl's name that he has picked, you're using female pronouns, he's being allowed to dress as a girl and use the girls' bathrooms and facilities at school and so on. And then he is placed on puberty blockers. And for another few years, this female identity is being endorsed, which, by the way, of course, is a false identity because he is not a girl and he can never be a girl. And that's a whole other chapter. You know, we are doing no favor to these children by endorsing a falsehood, no matter how much they dream of it and insist that they want it. We are not doing them a favor. So getting back to the blockers, I hope I'm not rambling here, but when
well, I want to get back to the reason why you think that the medical establishment and or whomever is pushing this.
Okay. All right. The medical establishment has been hijacked. The medical establishment, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have 67,000 members, or so they claim. Their association has been, at least in the field of gender, has been taken over by ideologues who have the agenda of pushing this, and of what they do is they form small committees that are in charge of producing policy statements for the organization. There is no opportunity to disagree. And I explain in my book, and I've interviewed pediatricians who are members of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they have described to me how they try to object to this policy of immediate affirmation of these kids and immediate gender affirming care, meaning the assembly line toward medical interventions and surgical interventions. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out in 2018 with a just full-blown 100% drank the Kool-Aid, using all the terms, the cisgender and the non-binary, and just the whole thing 100%, and that these kids know best who they are, put them in the driver's seat and just give them whatever they want. Now, what I want parents to understand is that the American Academy of Pediatrics simply does not permit disagreement, does not permit debate, does not permit articles to be published in their journals that disagree with this narrative, will not publish letters to the editor. All the articles that have come out, and there have been a lot, by pediatricians, by endocrinologists, by psychiatrists and psychologists, have to be published in just a few journals that are brave enough to publish them. So you have to understand that the cancel culture and the silencing of dissent that goes on in so many areas of our lives right now, right? It's not only in politics and education and the media, um, it's going on in medicine. So there is no, when the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, and other organizations come out with policy statements saying that, we're going with gender affirming care 100%. They have done no, there's no referendum. They've taken no vote of their 67,000 members. But what they do is create statements and policy, and then they say there's a consensus. This is what our organization is saying. And of course, they have tremendous clout all over the world. If the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying ABCD about the treatment of these children, well, come on. Who are we to say anything, right?
How do they get their positions? Are they elected? Are they appointed?
You mean like those committee members?
Yes.
Those committee members are generally volunteers. They have to be, it depends on the organization, but in some organizations, they might be chosen by higher ups. But in general, the people that are going to be joining these committees are people who have an interest in this. They have a certain axe to grind, they have certain beliefs, and they want it to go in a certain direction. I'm not saying every single member of the committee, but if you read the small print on the policy statements tomorrow, you'll see that it'll say that this policy statement does not necessarily represent the views of every single member of this committee, and it does not necessarily represent the views of the entire organization. But you see, that small print gets lost. And they've had tremendous success because, these policy statements are put out. The policy statement that I'm referring to in 2018 from the American Academy of Pediatrics had just one author. One author. And when there were published rebuttals or published fact-checking articles that came out subsequent to that statement, that went through the policy statement one thing at a time, and it was written by James Cantor, for example, who, James Cantor is somebody that has decades of experience working with these kids and adults. And he was a member of the famous clinic that used to exist in Toronto, Dr. Kenneth Zucker's clinic, the first clinic in the entire world that saw these kids. Okay, it was such a rare condition that there were only 20 years ago, there were only 3 clinics, in fact, in the entire world. But just getting back to the organizations, I'm explaining to you how the organizations take no responsibility in, they have no interest in any debate. What they say is the way it's going to be. James Cantor, a veteran researcher and clinician in this area, published a rebuttal to the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement in 2018. They did not answer. They would not publish anything. Zero. Eyes closed. This is how it's going to be. So I want people to understand what's going on here.
I want to ask you about these surgeons who go and castrate young boys who say that they're a girl and maybe they're only, like you said, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. They haven't matured yet. And or girls.
I'm just going to jump in. The castrations are not, the castrations happen later.
Okay.
They are done on minors, but most likely those minors are going to be, 16, 17 or above. But you are correct. These are, in general, these are boys who have significant mental illness, significant histories of trauma. They might be on the autism spectrum. And they have been drawn into this ideology and this belief system, and they have been led to believe that all their issues, their depression and their anxiety and the repercussions of their trauma, which in some cases terrible trauma. I had a patient who was sexually assaulted for many years by a family member, and he ended up identifying as a girl, hoping to escape his depression and his anxiety and his PTSD. And he was castrated, and his penis was turned into a structure that he was told would be a vagina. And he now regrets it. And I don't have the words to describe to you. I mean, he's now in his 20s. We're talking about a shattered life here. So I'm sorry to have jumped in, Tamar. Those castrations, I mean, you could argue that those kids are being chemically castrated, not surgically, but
Okay.
chemically castrated by the blockers, followed by the estrogen.
So these doctors, well, you're a psychiatrist. You know that what do they say, that the human brain doesn't really mature until 26 or 26 years old?
Mid-20s.
So these adolescents and or teens, etc., haven't reached that level of maturity yet to make such a lifelong decision. And I'm just wondering what goes through the heads of these surgeons that are cutting off girls' breasts, castrating young men. Do they do it just for, I mean, out of your opinion, the majority, because you can't put everybody in the same boat, but do you think they're doing it because they really believe in it, or they're just saying, look, this is what they said, I'm doing my job, that's what I do, and they don't care, or something else?
Okay. Well, I get asked this question so much, and I wish that I could just go to a meeting of gender surgeons and talk to them. Maybe I will. I haven't yet. I think that many of them are saying, in their minds, they say, look, the American Academy of Pediatrics is telling me that this is all kosher, and this is what we need to do for these kids in order to give them a good life. A, and they're not interested in hearing any other side of it. That's A. B, of course, the financial reward is huge. And interesting, I just read that I think in 2017 there were something like 250 surgeons in the U.S. that specialized in these gender surgeries, and now there's close to 1,000. So just in a few years, the numbers are ballooning because there is a huge market for it. Now, I think that I did actually ask one surgeon who is a very thoughtful and moral person. I asked this surgeon what is going on with his colleagues, and he told me that surgeons are very oriented toward fixing problems. So when they have a patient that says, well, I have a penis, but I want a vagina, their mind is just laser focused on how would I do that? And, it's a challenge for them. How am I going to give this person the best possible vagina? Okay, it's never going to be a real vagina. And so I think that the surgeons fall into, one or both of those categories. They're not going to sit down and do a lot of research into gender ideology. They just know that there's this whole population now that wants certain procedures. Why not? They're told that the organizations are putting their stamp of approval, putting their hechsher, that your audience is going to understand that, on these procedures. They're going to pay me, so why not? Now, in terms of the larger picture, though, Tamar, this question that you brought up a while ago, I do believe that if you're looking at the larger picture here from 30,000 feet, which I don't normally do. I'm looking at it, I'm in the home with the parents and the child. But if we move backwards and we look at this from 30,000 feet, okay, there is a movement called transhumanism. And these are people that believe that uh, we need to redesign humanity. We need to create a new version of what it means to be human, human 2.0, if you will.
Yeah.
And part of that involves the dissociation or the disembodiment, separating us from our bodies. And there are individuals that are very prominent in this transhumanism movement who are transgender themselves. Your listeners can Google, for example, Martine Rothblatt. Martine used to be Martin Rothblatt, a I think a billionaire actually. And Martine Rothblatt is, working feverishly to toward disembodiment and fighting. He believes he's going to succeed in fighting death. Okay, in preserving people, he made a robot of his wife. It's an interesting.
Sorry, he made a robot of his
wife.
Is she still alive?
Absolutely. You can watch an interview, you can watch a video in which his wife is talking to the robot that is designed to look and think and feel
so
like
AI.
her.
They're using AI there.
So they're downloading all the information that exists on his wife, downloading it into this robot. And so this robot looks and sounds and has conversations with people. So what I'm trying to say is there are people that are powerful and extremely wealthy that are promoting this idea of transcending humanity as we now know it, which of course brings to mind, right, the bubble, right, and how people wished to construct, a tower into the heavens and become greater than God, greater than Hashem. So it has certainly that flavor. Now, there are other individuals that are also extremely wealthy and also transgender, and they are putting millions and millions of dollars into promoting the ideology, promoting the gender clinics in hospitals, and all the organizations that surround this ideology that are informing children. I would say not informing, but indoctrinating children. So there is a huge, I want you to look up someone by the name of Jennifer Bilek. B like boy, I-L-E-K. And Jennifer is the brilliant researcher who is focused on the money part of this. She's dug really deeply into the money issue.
Her last name is spelled B-L-I-E-K?
No, B-I-L-E-K.
Oh, B-I-L-E-K. Okay.
Yeah, she has a blog called 11th Hour blog, I believe it's called.
Okay.
So if you want to learn about the money part, you do it through Jennifer Bilek.
Okay. I want to ask you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about, if very briefly, because we're running late and I know you need to go. If you had to give an approximation of the percentage of kids or people who are transgendering today, would you say it's 1% of the population, less, more? Do you have any idea?
Well, we know from the Tavistock Clinic in London, which is being closed down because of a scandal there. We know that their numbers showed a 5,000% increase in the past 10 years.
Wow.
5,000%. Now, but in terms of pure numbers, when you look, I think that recently there was a study that was done at Brown University. Of course, this non-binary identification, the identification of being something other than your biology, is, we would expect it to be greatest on college campuses, and it is, of course. And we're seeing something like, I think it was 30% of kids at Brown University were identifying as, it wasn't only the transgender, it was LGBT. So the transgender part of it, I can't tell you, but certainly we have many reports of, you know, like a high school class in which entire groups of kids, mostly girls, this is hitting, I didn't get into why this is, but the majority of kids that are being, drawn into this ideology are girls. Plenty of boys as well, but a majority girls. We know that we have groups of girls, friends from the same group, going into gender clinics and trying to get placed on testosterone, like as a group. They're all going in at once. So it's a social contagion. And once you have one kid who's identifying in this way, you're much more likely within the same friend group to get another one and another one and then another one.
It becomes more acceptable.
It is spread. Well, it's more acceptable, and it's these kids are vulnerable to this idea, especially when they feel different than other people, and they might feel unhappy with themselves and with their body changes. P.S. Who doesn't feel unhappy when their bodies begin to change, or at least somewhat awkward? And this new identity is presented to them as a solution for their sad or anxious or fearful feelings, for their, they may have been traumatized. Of course, they may be on the spectrum, and there's a whole other, there's a whole other thing going on with the kids on the spectrum and why they are drawn into this way of thinking. And I do explain this again. I'm just going to show you that I wrote a book, Lost in Transmission. It's not a book for professionals. It's not a book for therapists. It's a book for everyday mothers and fathers, so that they understand this issue, and they can feel strong and certain when they reject it, and they help their child reject it as well.
So I wanted to ask you, of those that are going through this transition, I know from your website, actually, that I went to go visit, and from your video, you talked about that there's a whole thing on Twitter called #DTrans, of people who were going through the process or went through the process and now regret it, and they want to return to their original sex, and they're already ruined, they're infertile, they're butchered, and there's lasting damage to all the drugs that they were taking and may still have to take, even though they're trying to trans back. Can you tell us more about that? Approximately how many that trans want to come back, if you have a number, but approximately, and what they're going through?
All right, so what you're referring to, there is a social media site called Reddit, and it's a very popular one. And within that social media site, there is a group called DTrans. So DTrans, that's correct, are the people that went through the so-called gender affirming care. They were affirmed. They went on and did, the perhaps the blockers or only the hormones. And then some of them also had surgery. Particularly the girls, a lot of them had bilateral mastectomies. And now well, I haven't checked recently, I'm sure there's more, but the last time I checked, the number of people that were in that group was 47,000. So these are individuals who, and I'm not saying, there may also be people joining that group that are just sort of interested in what they have to say and they want to enter the discussion. But there's no question that the majority of them are detransitioners, that they did live for a certain amount of time as the opposite sex, and now they have returned to their biology. And you are correct that many of them are disfigured, permanently disfigured, and many of them have to take hormones for the rest of their life because, they were damaged. Their hormonal system was damaged by these procedures, and they now need to take, for example, the patient that I told you about who was castrated needs to take lifelong testosterone. He's going to get in trouble if he doesn't get his testosterone shot every week. So you've created a permanent patient. Whether these kids detransition or not, a person who has transitioned is a lifelong patient, a lifelong consumer of pharmaceuticals. Now, the question that you're asking, Tamar, is a question about regret. How many people have regret? And that's a difficult question to answer. One of the reasons it's difficult is because we think it may take 8 or 10 years for people to fully be able to reach that point. They may feel some regret or some doubt or questioning years earlier, but for them to actually come to the point of saying, what have I done to myself? This was a mistake. I'm going to go back to living as a man or as a woman. That's a psychological process that takes a long time, and it takes a lot of courage. So we have every reason to believe that for every person, and there are a lot of them that are coming out and they are, admitting this was a mistake. I was conned into this. I was led to believe that I'm actually the opposite sex and that I need to change my bodies. For everyone like that, and I'm sure there's many thousands that are at that point of being vocal. When I say vocal, I mean that they are testifying, they are appearing in Congress, okay? They are being interviewed by the media. They are in documentaries. So we have a lot of those people, but behind unseen, the people that are unseen, I suspect are huge numbers. And we are going to have a tsunami of these young people that are, and it's, we didn't talk about suicide, and we don't have really the time to do that, but I am concerned about suicide in those individuals because when it hits them, what did I do to myself? I trusted my therapist. I trusted my doctor. My parents went along because they thought it was going to be best for me. And now look at this. Look at my body. I'm a lifelong patient. I may not be able to have children, or I for sure won't be able to have children. And who is going to love?
Wow. Yeah. And I hear a lot of them are in pain. They're in the chronic pain as well from these blockers and the drugs and et cetera, et cetera. So for the last question, I guess I want to talk to you about, besides purchasing your book, what can parents do that are concerned? Because I'm hearing stories that if a child feels that they are a different sex and they tell their teachers this, or their counselors, etc., they don't even have to inform the parents, and they can already start these kids on blockers and on this whole procedure. And the parents are helpless. And in many cases, I understand parents are intimidated, saying that, what would you rather have? a kid that commits suicide or have your little Jane be Joe? And what parent is going to want to take the chance that their kid will commit suicide?
That's true. I promise you, I do address the schools in my book, and I provide parents uh, with ways to be proactive in the schools. There's actual forms that can be downloaded. I don't know how it's going to go in Israel, but certainly in the U.S., you can put your school on notice that you don't go with any of this stuff, and you're not going to permit it. But it is a huge issue. The schools are trampling on the rights of parents, and they are socially transitioning using the new names and pronouns behind the parents' back. It is a big, big issue. I write stories of how this happened and the tragedies that resulted. The kids being removed from their loving homes because their parents would not use new names and new pronouns. This definitely is going on. I'm very concerned about what's happening in Israel. People are contacting me quite often from Israel and telling me horror stories about what's going on and what the kids are being led. They're being taught the whole thing. Just the whole ideology is being adopted there, and worse, you're being told that this is what the whole world is doing. Excuse me, the whole world is not doing this. Many countries are turning around and saying, wait a minute, there's no evidence that this is helping our kids. There's evidence that it is hurting our kids. Sweden, Norway, Finland, England, medical groups in New Zealand, Australia, France, and elsewhere are all coming out, and they're waving red flags. And I'm very concerned that in Israel, it's all a green light for all of this. This needs to be resisted. The facts need to be presented. They need to come out. And parents need to be warned to not accept this for their kids.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you. Can you hold up your book one more time for people who want to find out more? And you can get this also for someone that maybe you have a neighbor or a friend or a family member who is also has a child who is mixed up and the parents are mixed up. So this would be something that could help them and hopefully so. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Miriam Grossman, for coming on and talking to us about this.
You're welcome, Tamar. Thank you so much. I'm just going to add one thing, and that is, and I do hope that people will order it. It's going to be available in audio as well. It's available, an ebook is available. I actually narrated the audio book, so, and I'm quite passionate about this subject. So if you want to hear the book in a passionate voice, you can listen to that. The thing is that when you go on Amazon, there are a lot of bogus books that have been put up in order to trick people. Make sure that you get the actual genuine book. It's only hardcover. There's no workbook. There's no soft cover. There's make sure that it says there's a foreword by Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm very grateful to Dr. Peterson. He wrote an incredible forward to the book. Just make sure that you do get the right one. I'm in touch with many people in Israel who have been able to, they ordered it from Amazon and they have received it.
Right. And we'll leave a link directly to the Amazon page where people can get your original book. And again, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's so important to understand what's going on, why, and what we can do about it to protect our children. I can just imagine these kids, like you were saying, that they're detransing back and how they must feel also being betrayed by society and the medical establishment. I mean, this is something that, just like with the COVID debacle that went on, that people trusted their doctors, they trusted the medical establishment, and they were lied to in many cases. And it, you feel betrayed. It just crushes people. So I really feel
it is a medical scandal of huge proportions. So I'm doing my best to warn people. Thank you so much for putting me on there. And, I want to I would love to come to Israel and try and help get the word out there.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Tamar.
Hey everyone, to make sure you can get access to all of our interviews, make sure to hit the subscribe button on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. Your click makes us all stronger. Thanks.